So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everybody on the MAG Transit Committee. Just a couple things before we get started. As a reminder, please turn your mics on and state your name before speaking so that we all and members of the audience can hear you and know who's speaking. Remember to please mute your mics when not speaking. And phone attendees, you'll need to press *6 to unmute. Since this is a virtual meeting, all of the votes will be done by roll call for each item. And Kara, let's go ahead and get started with a roll call.
Mr. Worley, could we please advance the slide? So Chair Crampton, I think we switched up the order on the agenda a little bit on you. Sorry about that. So I think this item is supposed to be called to the audience.
Okay. So do we do a call to order and roll call first before we get to the audience usually?
Yes, we do.
Oh, apologies. Sorry, I'm confused. All right, 1 minute, please. So Ms. Dusenberry?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Banda?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Macias?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Bitter?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Coomer?
Present.
Mr. Williams?
Here.
Mr. Link?
Here.
Ms. McMurdy?
I'm here.
Mr. Kempton?
Here.
Ms. Sorrell?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, standing in for Ms. Colbath. Not hearing anything. Mr. Sapien?
Present and accounted for.
Thank you. Ms. Harmon?
Present.
Ms. Wilkie?
Present.
Mr. LaPuma? Not hearing anything. Mr. Peralta for Ms. Corpella?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor? Not hearing anything. Mr. Iverson?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Elias? Not hearing anything. Mr. Gregory for Ms. Ketcherside?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson? Not hearing anything. And finally, Chair Crampton?
Yep, I'm still here.
Thank you. We have a quorum confirmed, Chair Crampton. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kara. So now moving on to item number 2, call to the audience. An opportunity for public comment on the agenda was provided ahead of the meeting. So Kara, have we received any public comments?
Chair Crampton, we have not received any comments on this item or any other item on the agenda today.
All right, great, thank you. So moving on to item number 3, Transportation Planning Program Manager's Report. Audra Kester-Thomas, the Transportation Planning Program Manager with MAG, will provide a report. Audra.
Thank you, Chairman Crampton, members of Transit Committee. Good to be with you today. Just 2 quick announcements. First, a welcome to friend of Transit Committee, Matt Dudley, albeit from a different agency. Congratulations, Mr. Dudley, on your appointment to Transit Committee on behalf of the City of Avondale. Excited to have you back on this committee. The second announcement is we will be sending out a solicitation for vice chair nominations. If this is something you are interested in, we will be seeking a letter of interest submitted hopefully by your city manager by November. We annually update our chair and vice chair according to MAG policies and principles. Our vice chair will proceed and be placed as chair next year. As you know, and as custom at MAG, we appreciate a sub-regional approach with Chairman Crampton from the East Valley and Vice Chair Sapien from Phoenix or Central. We'd be looking, if at all possible, to a West Valley interest to serve in a vice chairman and then subsequent chair capacity. If you are interested, please coordinate with Kara. We will be distributing that solicitation this week for your consideration. With that, Chairman Crampton, that completes my report. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions after the meeting.
All right, thank you, Audra. Okay, moving on to item number 4, approval of the minutes. So since we did not, or since our last meeting was a joint meeting with the Active Transportation Committee, we did not have a chance to approve the May 3rd meeting minutes. So today we will need to approve the May 3rd meeting minutes as well as the June 15th joint Active Transportation Transit Committee minutes. So MAG staff, do we do this all as one vote, I take it?
Chair Crampton, that's correct. We do it as one vote.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, can I get a motion to approve both the May 3rd and June 15th minutes?
This is Christine from Goodyear. I move to approve the May 3rd, 2021 Transit Committee meeting minutes and the June 15th, 2021 Joint Active Transportation and Transit Committee meeting minutes.
Perfect,
Mr.
thank you.
Chair.
And a second?
This is Jesus from Phoenix. I second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Okay, Kara, can you do the vote, please?
Sure, be happy to. Starting back up at the top, please indicate how you vote. Ms. Dusenberry?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley?
I will be abstaining since I was at neither meeting.
All right, Mr. Banda?
Aye.
Mr. Macias?
Aye.
Mr. Bitter?
Aye.
Ms. Coomer?
Abstain.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Link?
Aye.
Ms. McMurdy?
Aye.
Mr. Kempton?
Aye.
Ms. Sorrell?
Aye.
Mr. Sapien?
Aye.
Ms. Harmon?
Aye.
Ms. Wilkie?
Aye.
Mr. Peralta?
Abstain.
Mr. Iverson?
Aye.
Mr. Gregory?
Aye.
And Chair Crampton?
Aye.
Thanks. Did anyone enter the meeting that I missed?
Hi, this is
Okay,
Kristen from Surprise.
Oh, Kristen.
I did
thank
join after, yeah. And I vote
so-
aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this is Jay Davies from Peoria. I will abstain, though.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Chair Crampton, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Kara. Moving on to item number 5 is the Regional Bus Rapid Transit Feasibility Study. So Kara, this one will be your presentation as well. So I will turn it over to you. Just wanted to remind everybody that this item is on the agenda for action first. So go ahead, Kara.
Thank you, Chair Crampton, members of the Transit Committee. Next slide, please. I'm here today to present to you the Regional Bus Rapid Transit Feasibility Study final report and results. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this study was to lay the groundwork for implementing a regional BRT system. We wanted to identify high-performing corridors and develop regional BRT performance and design standards. So as many of you might know, the City of Phoenix also kicked off a BRT study in tandem to this one. And we worked in close coordination with them to ensure that our results were complementary. And our analysis was very much in line with the City of Phoenix results. Excuse me for 1 minute. My device, sorry. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So next slide, please. This is an overview of the project process. So we kicked it off in November 2019 and concluded in the summer of 2021. You can see here all of the major tasks outlined, and the final report was included in the information that was distributed for today's meeting and can now also be seen on the MAG website. Next slide, please. So our process was highly centered around stakeholder engagement, and we formed a technical advisory group to really drive this process. With their input, we developed visions, goals, and objectives, BRT standards and performance measures, and ultimately identified a potential regional BRT system. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the regional vision, goals, and objectives that we identified in partnership with our TAG. Through the study, we wanted to improve regional mobility, accessibility, and connectivity, ultimately creating a more balanced transportation system, develop regional performance and design standards, encourage transit supportive land use and development, and ultimately ensure that the process was inclusive to garner regional support, since that's so important to the success of this project. Next slide, please. This is a map of the study area, which included 7 cities across the valley. So we have Glendale, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, Chandler, Gilbert, and Mesa. This area was selected based on density and transit propensity and characteristics that would ultimately support high capacity transit investments. Next slide, please. So our initial analysis relied heavily on data, which we used to develop a transit propensity map, as shown here. We used demographic data to predict where high capacity transit might be the most successful based on resident characteristics. Next slide, please. And we also looked at major activity centers, which we identified with input from our TAG. Next slide, please. So the result of this analysis was a universe of potential BRT corridors. You'll notice that the potential City of Phoenix BRT corridors are shown here on the map in green. And the City of Phoenix evaluated these 6 corridors, but again, we also evaluated them through the regional study, and our results largely supported theirs. Next slide, please. The next step in our process was to evaluate each of the potential corridors using these 13 evaluation criteria. Each criterion was assigned a metric and a point value as shown here. And then this allowed us to score and rank all of the potential corridors. The ranked corridors were refined through stakeholder interviews and with input from our TAG. In the analysis, we focused on existing transit ridership and service equity because these are both strong indicators that a corridor could support improved service. In other words, we want to make investments in the service in areas where people are likely to use it. Next slide, please. The BRT corridor evaluation resulted in the identification of high potential and other potential BRT corridors as shown on this map. There were 8 high potential corridors, and I'll just list them off now. So we had 35th Avenue and Van Buren Street, Camelback Road and 24th Street, Thomas Road and 44th Street, Scottsdale and Rural Road, the Capitol I-10 corridor, Country Club Drive and Arizona Avenue, Glendale Avenue, and finally Baseline Avenue. Next slide, please. Along with the recommended future BRT network, the study produced BRT performance and design standards. These design standards identify recommended or required components of the BRT system while emphasizing corridor level implementation flexibility. So, and we wanted to give some good recommendations without being over prescriptive and allowing cities to kind of implement what works for them. These performance and design standards were developed with input from our technical advisory group and
Sounds like we may have lost Kara. We're going to give her just a moment in case her connection establishes itself. I think I'll pick it up from here for now. So David, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. So clearly there are a lot of things to consider in implementing BRT. We are excited to have 3 corridors included in the Momentum Plan for the extension funding after the year 2026. As part of the design standards, in addition to this, we gave that consideration. So we wanted to include planned as well as active transportation investments throughout the corridors, continued commitment to transit signal priority and preemption, which is really important to making a BRT product really high quality. Obviously, existing number of lanes as well as right-of-way constraints through some of these corridors, which is going to make dedicated fixed guideway sometimes easier, sometimes more challenging. Of course, in addition to that, access management issues, as well as the potential for development or even redevelopment throughout these corridors. Next slide. As noted by Kara, collaboration outreach was really important. We were driven this study through a technical advisory group made up of member agencies within the study area. We proceeded with stakeholder interviews, went around the country and found peers who had established successful BRT, looking to carve some areas of success out of their established programs. We, of course, established a web presence as well. We included an educational video. This is a new product for the region, so we wanted to make sure we provided some definition and context, provided an online survey to help garner feedback early in the project, also had an interactive comment map where people could drop pins and provide feedback on different corridors. We also, in the pandemic, utilized a virtual public meeting product where folks could come online and pretend as if they were walking around a room. I know several of you have used a similar product during the pandemic to establish a public involvement presence. We issued that product back in October to solicit feedback for recommendations. Next slide. So as noted by Chair Crampton, this item is on your agenda today for consideration of action, specifically to recommend acceptance of the Regional Bus Rapid Transit Feasibility Study. I and hopefully Kara will be joining again soon. We can answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Audra and Kara. Thank you if you're back with us. So does anybody have any questions or comments before we go to a vote?
Yeah, this is Christine, Mr. Chair. Early on in the presentation, I think it was like the 3rd or the 4th slide in, you had a map with demographic information in the bottom left corner. Could we bring that slide back up? And if there's any way you could just kind of, oh, that's it. Transit dependent population scores. Can you kind of give us what that table is doing down there?
So absolutely, Chairman Crampton, Ms. McMurdy. So as we talked even about back in the transit feasibility study now 2 or 3 years ago, transit characteristics are different in driving demand as opposed to roadway users. And so there are certain population characteristics where looking not just for choice riders, but transit dependent populations help to inform characteristics associated with finding those best corridors. And what you'll see located in the bottom corner there are several of those characteristic populations. What you'll see then the scores associated based on the rubric used to score individual corridors to best identify ranking of priority of the evaluated corridors. And Kara, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else onto that answer.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. Nothing to add. I just wanted to make sure my mic was working. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Audra. Kara, any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, it's Kevin in Glendale.
Okay.
Audra, Kara, I just have a question. So with the, the work we're doing on the extension and, everything that's been done thus far regarding those projects, where do we go from here with BRT? I mean, I know there's a couple of corridors that were identified for the extension, but I was just curious how we take this study and how we use it for the 400E extension.
I can jump in here. Can you hear me? Okay, just making sure. Chair Crampton, members of the Transit Committee, Mr. Link, thanks for your question. So the intention of this study or the results of this study have fed or are going to feed directly into the regional transportation plan. There are 3 corridors which we are anticipating to receive 70% regional funding as part of the RTP. Those corridors are 35th and Van Buren, Scottsdale Rural Road, and Country Club and Arizona Avenue. So that's kind of the direct results of this study, but of course, we're going to continue to do an iterative planning process and refine and revisit these into the future. I hope that helps answer your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kara. Any further questions? Okay, I just wanted to thank MAG staff and your consultant. I thought this was a good process. A lot of involvement throughout for all the member agencies, and in specific, we had some one-on-one meetings with the consultant. And I just thought that this was a well-done study, and really appreciate all the effort to involve all the communities and do the public outreach. So thank you, MAG staff. If there's anybody that wants to make a motion, we can take that now.
Mr. Chair, this is Jesus from Phoenix. I recommend acceptance of the Regional Bus Trip Rapid Transit Feasibility Study.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. And do we have a second?
This is Eric in Tempe. I will make the second.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, Kara, can you do the vote?
Yes, hopefully my internet hangs on for long enough. So starting back at the top here, Ms. Dusenberry.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley.
Aye.
Mr. Banda.
Aye.
Mr. Macias.
Aye.
Mr. Bitter.
Aye from Mr. Bitter.
I think that might be on my end. I'm sorry.
Sounds good now.
That wasn't you, Kara.
Kara, are you still there? All right, appreciate everyone's patience as we wait for Kara to reconnect in the middle of a vote. So one moment, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Bitter.
Aye.
Ms. Coomer,
Aye.
Mr. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Link,
Aye.
Miss McMurdy,
Aye.
Mr. Kempton,
Aye.
Miss Sorrell,
Aye.
Mr. Davies,
Aye.
Mr. Sapien,
Aye.
Miss Harmon,
Aye.
Miss Wilkie,
Aye.
Mr. Peralta,
Aye.
Miss Taylor,
Aye.
Mr. Iverson,
Aye.
Mr. Elias, oh, Mr. Gregory,
Aye.
and Chair Crampton.
Aye.
Chair Crampton, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you, Kara. So moving on to item number 6 is the semi-annual status report on federal grant activity. This item is for information and will be presented by Ken Kessler with City of Phoenix.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I don't have a formal presentation to provide today. Just want to give a high-level update of the status of our grant program. In your packet is the grant status report as of June 30th. You can see there's about $1.5 billion in awarded grant funds in open grants, with about $289 million unspent. We're actually about almost 300 million higher in awarded grant funds than we were a year ago, mostly due to the federal COVID relief funds that we have received, the three acts that have provided several $100 million to the region. However, the good news side is actually we are down about 100 million in unspent funds. So we are moving the funds fairly quickly. I know Phoenix, we have spent all of our CARES Act money. We are about almost 10 million into the CRISA funds. And I know Valley Metro as well has spent quite a bit of their CARES Act and not quite yet into the CRISA funds. We do, however, even though we do seem to be making good progress in spending down our funds, we have about $300 million of grant funds in the hopper, so to speak. There are a number of grants. 3 of them are light rail grants, which make up the vast majority of that money. There's a grant for 2 years of funding for Northwest Phase 2, which is $100 million. There's the federal fiscal year 21 annual allocation for South Central, about $97 million. And then the ARPA grant funds for South Central of about $81 million. And then the Tempe streetcar, about $17 million from ARPA for that project. So those are the majority of the grants that are in the process. The grants are in the development and FTA review process and should be awarded here probably in the next 2 to 4 months. So that then obviously that will increase that column to the left in the total grant funds awarded in open grants. But the light rail grants are moving pretty quickly in terms of drawing down those funds because those projects are progressing at a good pace right now. Other than that, mostly we have some buses and some technology projects between Phoenix and Valley Metro that make up a lot of the balance of the unspent funds. And obviously those projects are moving. There's been some delays in bus acquisitions due to delays at the manufacturer, supply chain issues, and plant shutdowns for some of the manufacturers across the country that have delayed bus acquisitions. But hopefully here in the next year or so, we'll kind of get back on track with that. And the technology projects, we're wrapping up the CAD AVL project. I think there's one more invoice to pay to the Clever Devices And that should wrap up that project in terms of the grant funds. And then the fare collection project is about 1 year underway, and we've made a few milestone progress payments on that project, and that project is moving along at a pretty good pace. So that's pretty much a high-level update of kind of where we're at with our grant funds. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Does anybody have any questions? All right, summarized everything perfectly, no questions. Thank you, Ken. So moving on to item number 7 is an update on the development of a new regional transportation plan. And Audra Kester-Thomas will be presenting on this item. Audra.
Thank you, Chairman, members of Transit Committee. Pleased to provide an update, exciting update associated with the development of a new regional transportation plan to inform the extension of Maricopa County's dedicated sales tax, known today as Proposition 400. Next slide. Next slide. Today's presentation is going to walk us through recent history in building momentum, which is what we have called the new investment plan, funds from 2026 beyond to 2050. Talk a little bit about that process where we left off back in May with you all, and then where we've landed with your mayors this summer. We're going to take a step back and talk about the federally required documents for which codify these series of decisions, but also ultimately roll up with past decisions, talking about the federally required development of a regional transportation plan, a transportation improvement program, both which work in concert with each other, in addition to the air quality conformity analysis required as we are in a non-attainment area. And then we'll talk about next steps. Next slide. So let's first talk about momentum and the blueprint for our investments that formed with the extension of Proposition 400. Next slide. You are all familiar with our performance-based evaluation process. We are required by both federal and state statute to use data to make difficult decisions for a region that definitely has more transportation need than available funding. This process concluded this summer with our final scenario planning development work, which was used to inform development of a final scenario, preferred scenario, if you will, that was tweaked by our Transportation Policy Committee and then codified and adopted by Regional Council. Next slide. You'll recall back in May, we developed and presented for feedback 4 different scenarios, 2 different concepts, each at 2 different funding levels. Continuation of the established half-cent sales tax, originally established in Maricopa County back in 1985, but also what else we could deliver if we were to increase that sales tax to 1 cent, the same authorization all other counties in the state of Arizona already have. We presented those 4 different scenarios, certainly through all our committees, but also in a public involvement stage, and sought feedback from our policymakers. Next slide. The end of May, our Transportation Policy Committee, our committee that is defined by state statute to develop the regional transportation plan, they gave us direction to start with that system optimization half-cent scenario. They also gave us the direction to work with member agencies to identify any remaining priorities that perhaps were not included in that scenario, and gave us the authority to consider a tax rate above a half cent if we needed to squeeze those priorities in, but also an alternative to consider an extended tax rate. So not necessarily increasing cash flow, but extending the term and thereby the years for which we would commit projects in order to squeeze projects in. Next slide. We came back in June, delivering 2 new alternatives. One at 0.6 cents for 20 years, and another remaining that half-cent sales tax, but for 25 years. Again, not increasing cash flow, but extending another 5 years worth of committed projects. Based on feedback in June with the Transportation Policy Committee and final additions and edits by the committee, they unanimously recommended and Regional Council endorsed that half-cent 25-year option. Next slide. We came back and worked throughout the month of July with your elected officials, ultimately on the phasing component. That's the last key element associated with plan development as part of air quality analysis. And ultimately, TPC recommended in July, and then at the end of July, Regional Council unanimously endorsed the phasing and entrance into our formal air quality conformity process. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about that investment plan. Next slide. As you know, we put all money available to the region on the table as we're developing these programs. At that 25-year horizon, about $19.5 billion comes from that half-cent sales tax. We add to it the state highway user revenue funds available to the region through ADOT, as well as our federal formula funds for both freeway, highway, and transit. That comprises a total of approximately $36.7 billion in projected revenues. Next slide. You'll see here the high capacity and regionally significant discrete projects included in this plan. Again, these are projects funded through the extension of the sales tax, as well as federal formula funding in the year 2026 through 2050. Just a couple of highlights for you. I'll focus specifically on the transit pieces. You'll see here two regionally supported extensions of light rail, or portion of regional funding will go to match local as well as anticipated federal discretionary funding. One for the extension in West Phoenix, in or around the Camelback area, LPA yet to be determined, as well as an extension of light rail on I-10 West. You'll also see two extensions of the streetcar coming out of Tempe and into Mesa, east along Rio Salado, south on Dobson, and then east again on Southern. And then you'll see, as mentioned just before, 3 bus rapid transit corridors that have some support for regional funding: 35th, Scottsdale Rural Road, and then Country Club Arizona Avenue. You'll also see important HOV completions, completing out our freeway network, as well as a few DHOVs, system interchanges, and a myriad of other projects included on this map. Next slide. I also don't want I do want to take this time to feature our programmatic investments. This is one of the strategies we're using to ensure that we're continuing to be nimble into the future, being flexible, is moving more funding towards these regionally significant programs, using and leaning on our established call for projects into the future. We've added more funding to these programs, in fact, established a few new programs that we feel will allow the region, while looking at a horizon of the year 2050, to respond to changes as they occur. Also, those projects on the map often get top billing, but we don't want to shirk and certainly don't want to underestimate the power of these programs that are particularly important to member agencies. Taken in a whole, these are smaller projects that are awarded, but complete and add to a system, and we feel really strongly about these programs. Next slide. You'll see active transportation. This is a continuing and considerable expansion of active transportation investment. $1 billion we have set aside for this program, really bolstering the underpinnings of a successful program to date. Of course, continuation of our air quality mitigation factors, additional arterial investments that span anything from reimagining our grid system to extending it, but also to rehabilitating it as necessary. As you all know, we have a regionally branded but largely locally funded transit network. And while there is some support from the region for our grid network, we were able to nearly double that amount in addition to the important capital investments the region makes into the fleet, as well as ADA. It is not and will not replace the tremendous amount of local funding that is needed and for which our regional system relies on to establish the transit network we have today. We've established a new emerging technology pot of funding. Again, our policymakers felt this was extremely important looking into the future and being able to be responsive to new innovations as they emerge. Of course, continuation and expansion of our ITS program and safety programs that have been long steadfast at MAG, in addition to a new program that I think this group and particularly staff at MAG is really excited about, a regional transportation demand management program, ways and strategies that we can squeeze more operational value out of the existing investments in this system, really take the pressure off those peak periods, and as well as offer construction mitigation strategies for the next Broadway Curve project as we rehabilitate some of our original infrastructure across the region. Next slide. You can learn more online. We've also published the RTP and TIP today as part of our 30-day public comment period, all available online. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the intersection of our planning work in addition to policy as well as our conformity process. Next slide. So it's important to recognize that our focus over the last 18 months to 2 years has really been on the extension of Proposition 400 and making decisions about commitments of projects and program funding from the year 2026 to 2050. We now have to roll those decisions up along with our last 5 years of the Proposition 400 program, as well as any regionally significant project that's funded either locally or through an alternative program, including Pinell County's RTA. So let's first stop and work on a little definitions. Our regional transportation plan, again, a federally prescribed document for which we need to produce. It is intended to be a long-range vision of high capacity, regionally significant projects to deliver how we are going to move have the efficient movement of people and goods throughout the region. It's principally focused on how we're intending to spend our federal formula dollars and ensure good maintenance of those investments the federal government has already invested in for this region. Must have a horizon year of at least 20 years out. And again, as I mentioned before, focuses on a regionally significant project portfolio. The Transportation Improvement Program is a near-term list of projects. It has to have a horizon year of at least 4 years. It must include all regionally significant projects, regardless of funding source, and by definition, serves as the first 4 years of the regional transportation plan. Both an RTP and TIP must be performance-based, as mentioned earlier. It must be fiscally constrained, so we need to defend that we have available revenues to support the projects therein. Both must be updated at least every 4 years, although we have traditionally been updating these documents every 2 years or so. And as I mentioned, must reflect all funding sources and programs. That includes our last 5 years or so of the Proposition 400 program, the proposed Proposition 400 extension program known as Momentum, the Pinell RTA projects that are within our planning area, and any wholly funded projects at a local or private level. And of course, both of these documents and the projects contained herein must be air quality conformant. Next slide. This is intended to help demonstrate the interesting and unique, perhaps complex overlap between our planning processes and of course our funding and policy elements. You'll see that last 5 years of our Proposition 400 program, extending through December 31st of 2025, and then our committed projects with the assumed extension of Proposition 400 starting January 1st of 2026 and beyond to the end of 2050. Below it, then you'll see the overlap of these two federally required documents, the TIP being the next 4 fiscal years and the RTP extending out now to a horizon of 2050. Next slide. What are our next steps? Next slide. You're familiar with this slide on our forward lookout. We are in the midst of our air quality conformity process. As I mentioned, we have our documents starting today out for review as our final 30-day public comment period before we come back to our policy committee process for final adoption by the end of this year. Next slide. The nuanced details associated with our air quality conformity process is in fact this 30-day public comment period. All 3 documents are available now online. Our new regional transportation plan draft, the new transportation improvement program or TIP draft, as well as the air quality conformity analysis drafts. We will collect all feedback received over this next 30 days and bring that documentation through our policy committee process starting in November with management committee and transportation policy committee, and then regional council in December, which we hope will be a celebratory event for the adoption of the regional transportation plan, as well as the TIP and conformity analysis. We then work with our federal partners to ensure air quality conformity and would expect issuance of a finding of conformity as early as January of 2022. Next slide. While we have made significant progress, and it should not be underestimated how important the decisions Transportation Policy Committee and Regional Council made this summer are, we still have a little work left to do, and our focus primarily now turns to enabling legislation. As we've discussed before, Maricopa County is treated differently than the counties throughout the state of Arizona. We first must go to the legislature to seek permission to ask Maricopa County voters for a continuation of the sales tax. That is done through enabling legislation. We have about 2 handfuls worth of different statutes that govern how we do business. Again, no other county in Arizona has quite that level of regimen associated by the state legislature. So our focus right now is enabling legislation. That'll be our focus this fall and winter. Hopeful to get in and out of session successfully and early next year to allow placement of a continuation of the sales tax through the year 2050 to be placed on Maricopa County ballots next November of 2022. Next slide. So with that completes my presentation. I do just want to take a moment of personal privilege. This summer was a busy summer for us. It was a particularly busy summer for you and your elected officials. I want to extend my gratitude on behalf of all of us here at MAG. This really did take a partnership, working collaboratively together. I know you all did a really good job prepping your elected officials for the decisions ultimately being made, specifically in May, June, and July of this summer. I know many of you worked late nights with us as well as weekends, and I just wanted to express on behalf of all of us at MAG our appreciation for your hard work in getting your elected officials really to the decision points that we had. We don't take lightly that these were unanimous decisions, and we particularly are excited going into enabling legislation where we're all on this together, shoulder to shoulder with these unanimous decisions. So Chairman Crampton, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Audra. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Audra. Great presentation and great work from Ag staff throughout this whole process. Really appreciate all the hard work. So now moving on to the next item on the agenda, item number 8, request for future agenda items. Does anybody have any requests?
This is Eric in Tempe. This isn't really a future request. I just want to give a heads up that I'm in an interim role at the City of Tempe as the interim Deputy Engineering and Transportation Director, and Sam Stevenson, who's on this call, and I think everyone is familiar with, will be the interim transit manager for our city for a period of time. So you'll see both of us, but primarily you will see him as, thank you.
Great, thank you, Eric. Anybody else? Okay, if not, we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is adjournment. So I will go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
You guys.